This video is made possible by the Eliason Group, an Agile consulting service. You can locate the video under Follow Us, then select Recent Videos on YouTube on the agilenewengland.org website.
I'd like to welcome Staci and David.
So we're talking tonight about transforming a creative agency. And to kick things off this evening, we're going to ask that we spend about the first 8 minutes of tonight doing a brief activity. We're going to ask you to pair with somebody that's seated right around you and spend about the first 4 minutes answering the question that we have up on screen. And then after those 4 minutes are going to go by really quickly in pairs, meet another pair, introduce yourselves quickly, and then share what you have discussed. And let us know if you have any questions. So if you haven't already, feel free with your pair to meet up with another pair and share what you've discussed. Casually. All done. Double pairing. All right. Maybe you can share with different pairs.
Hi, would you like to share?
I'm going to take 1 or 2 volunteers if somebody would like to share what they were discussing with their pair. Do you have any volunteers to share what you were discussing?
So the group here and group here, I think we're all pretty much on the same page. The thought process is that in advertising agencies, you've got a lot of creative people, and they probably don't feel like they could be managed with the artistic process. And they don't want anybody telling them how to do their work. They're just going to get their work done. That's the summary.
Sure. Thank you. Does anybody have something else that they'd like to share, something different?
We were thinking that at the beginning, when they're coming up with an advertising campaign, that there might be this need for brainstorming and kind of a process that doesn't lend itself to something as structured as Kanban. But once they had a campaign going, to track results or leads or something like that, then it would be perfect.
Okay. All right, thank you for sharing. So certainly we faced a lot of resistance when we were looking to take Agile beyond technology. And to overcome some of this, we're going to describe to you tonight from different perspectives how we overcame what we've kind of called up as our key resistors. And before we do that, I want to set some context so that each of our different stories tonight, as they weave together, make more sense to you. So we're going to begin with the Vistaprint story. Who are we? Like many, we are a company in transition. We used to be known as a company of free business cards, and now, hopefully, we've transitioned to be much more universal, and we offer a lot of products and services to help small and micro businesses market their companies. While we're also known as a paper company or the printing company, we are truly a technology company at heart. So it's no surprise that our Agile transformation took hold first in our technology organization. They went from waterfall to Scrum, and the Kanban teams transitioned from measuring project timelines in years, that's plural, to measuring them in weeks. We deploy every 3 weeks to production, and there are some squads currently that are doing daily or continuous deployment. So the agency at Vistaprint, who are we? We are user experience designers. We have some sitting in the room today. Photographers, graphic designers, copywriters. We even have video production. We also used to have account managers, and their primary role was to manage relationships. We have one sitting in the room tonight too. But we no longer have this role. It's a responsibility of everybody within creative to own and manage the relationships and to reach across the aisles. And this is an important piece of our transition. Let me tell you why in just a minute. So again, it's everybody's responsibility to build these relationships. And yes, we were known as everybody's worst nightmare. If you had to work with the creative agency at Vistaprint, you were automatically adding 12 weeks to your project timelines. So it was a nightmare. I bet too. So I am Staci. I am an Agile coach at Vistaprint currently, but I was hired 4 years ago as a user experience design and researcher. I had prior experience with Agile teams prior to coming to Vistaprint. And when I got there, I had the fortune of working on squads who were experimenting with embedding UX, QA, analytics, and other part-time roles onto their teams. So that's where I got a lot of my formal education and training. It was through those pilots and those programs, again, within the technology organization. And at some point along my journey, I was so bought in and it just felt so right, it was in my blood, I went rogue and I started bringing some of this education into the creative agency.
So you got infected, did you?
I think I always was. It's in me. Yep. So this got the attention of senior leadership. I traveled a bit and went to different parts of our organization, and it took hold. So that's sort of my journey. About a year ago, I transitioned fully from my role as a designer to a full-time Agile coach within Vistaprint, first within the creative agency, and now for all of our Vistaprint business unit. So I'm going to transition now to our executive story. So from the executive's perspective, here's what our transformation to agility looked like. At the beginning of, when we begin any engagement, we look to the data. We do a lot of observing. We listen, we interview. And what we heard when we went to the VP of our internal creative agency, she was tired of being blamed for always delivering late. Right? It was just known that creative, this nightmare, adding 12 weeks timeline, it wasn't good. Then we went to her counterpart, the VP of marketing, and she was tired of being blamed for using so many creative resources. So the willingness to begin to experiment with the creative and marketing teams really came from this motivation. And as David likes to say, never miss an opportunity to exploit a good crisis. That's exactly what we did. So now I'm going to transition to that story. We took first the North America email team. It consisted of creative designers within our creative agency and their counterparts, the email marketers, which was another part of the organization. And together, we established this pilot. So this is their story, in their words. This team was frustrated. Nothing was going right. But don't take my word for it. This is the team, how the team felt at the start of the pilot. They faced many issues. The first was with feedback. It often took several days to consolidate and deliver feedback. They were dependent on written feedback, which prevented collaboration. And they were working in an environment with very little trust. There were also unclear decision rights on the marketing side. Often it took several people and several levels to get feedback on the creative before it was even passed to creative designers to make changes. So again, this left the team feeling very unempowered. And it took a really long time to get creative work done. Projects in flight shifted focus often, and the team, the designers, had little visibility into each other's work, so they weren't equipped to adapt to these changing requirements, so everything was multiplied. So they got the approval from the VP of Marketing and the VP of Creative to run an experiment, and that's essentially what this pilot was. The first thing they did was they selected a small group of creative designers who are going to be dedicated solely to this channel, just to create emails. They agreed on what their primary issues were to gain upfront alignment and visibility. They wanted to create an environment with more frequent but less formal meetings and a lot more face-to-face communication. They also knew that they had to build trust and build the relationships at a personal level, so they wanted to get to know each other one-on-one. So they spent a lot of time outside the office doing that. And they had an Agile coach to help steer them towards working in a more Agile way. They went through a mindset shift to be much more in line with Norm Kurth's Prime Directive. So with those things, with various tools, techniques, and putting principles into practice, this team was becoming Agile. They went through many early iterations of a low-cost, easy-to-implement Kanban board, which they put in a central location to visualize their work. And with the Kanban board came certain practices. They held daily stand-ups. The entire creative design team and their marketing partners daily met to talk about the work. Creative requests in the past were usually delivered months in advance with a lot of detail in them, even though the marketers, months in advance, really didn't know what those details were. So now, while creative requests still get submitted a long time in advance, far in advance, they wait until they see that the creative teams are ready to start the work, and it's at that point that they add all the details that are relevant and timely and up to date and much more accurate. So there's a lot less shifting as projects are in flight. And the team started holding retrospectives monthly. They use smart actions and smart goals to do incremental improvements on a continuous basis. So while the pilot was focused primarily on Agile values and principles and putting those into practice, the team also knew that they needed to rely on decision effectiveness to help them with these feedback swirls. This team had a hypothesis. They believed that by clarifying decision rights, that they would drastically reduce the amount of time it took to collect feedback and in turn reduce the frustration among the team. They took a calculated risk by pushing down decision rights to just the core team, which at this point was individual contributors, where in the past it was very senior directors having input into the creative. So this was, like I said, a calculated risk, but a fairly big experiment that they were running. And the results were phenomenal. They drastically reduced the time it took to create email assets. The team felt empowered to make decisions, and most importantly, there was little to no change in the email performance, which meant that they were now able to roll this out for all the email campaigns, not just on select specific low-risk projects. So this was a phenomenal surprise. This was a great surprise, I think, for the leadership team and for this North American email team as part of the pilot. So they found success, right? It was a surprising success to everybody. So we knew we were onto something. Here are the metrics. This is what's really going to help illustrate the point that we're making here. At the beginning of the pilot, it took upwards of 40 business days to create an email. 40. It's a long time. At the end of the formal pilot, about 4 months later, they dropped that down to 15 business days. And because they were in this Agile mindset and nobody wanted to go back to the old way of working, they continued incremental improvements, and by later that year, they were down to just 7 business days for an overall reduction of 83%. Their cycle time metrics tell a similar story. At the beginning of the pilot, it took roughly 15 business days to complete an email. And at the end of the pilot, they got that down to about 8 days. Then senior leadership came in and said, wow, that's phenomenal, but not good enough. We're going to give you a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal to try and reduce that cycle time down to just 1 week or 5 business days for an email by the end of our Q1. And this team was set up for success. They exceeded all expectations and are now down to about 4 days for their cycle time. The team also wanted to track delivery metrics. In the past, they delivered all assets severely late, and this had a big impact on QA and properly setting up emails according to best practices. So now, at the conclusion of the pilot, most creative assets were delivered on time, if not early. And while there were still about 21% that are delivered late, those are typically late by less than a day, so they have zero impact on downstream deployment. So this is a phenomenal story. Here's the team at the time of the pilot. This is our North America email team. They weren't just doing Agile, they're being Agile. And here's how the team felt in their words.
Could you talk a little bit about engagement and energy levels?
What do you think happened? Engagement from the individual contributors went up.
Embedded here, but in terms of the improvements, what do people
Yep. So
personally feel about it?
personally, I was hoping that it was a little bit reflected in the words that they were describing from the beginning of the pilot to the end, but they were much more engaged. The motivation of the individuals on the team rose dramatically. They felt more vested in the work they were doing. They were able to understand what goals they were trying to achieve in the projects that they were working on. And they felt more like a team. They knew each other on a more personal level. So they learned how to interact with each other, and that just brought them even closer together.
I'm wondering whether, can you tell a quote-unquote defining moment, that is, when the team took a decision and ran with it and found out that senior management or the product owner actually meant what they were saying, and the team had the aha moment and trusted the people after it. Can you identify what that defining moment was where that happened?
Only through any transformation, I think everybody goes through that aha moment when they finally get it. David, I don't know if you want to talk more specifically.
In this case, I'm not sure there was any one aha moment because it was a series of revelations and understandings. I think maybe the first truly dramatic moment, and I'll talk about it a little bit in the second half, happened on our chartering event where both vice presidents came to the meeting and gave the team permission to experiment, understanding that experiments sometimes fail. And previously to that, the culture didn't tolerate failure. So I think that was one of the critical moments. But there were a number of success factors along the way, and we'll talk about some of them in more detail.
Can you explain a little more about the success that you had a bullet that said the results were surprisingly successful, but it sounded like you were saying the surprising success was that everything worked the way it had. So I'm confused about what you meant when you said, it didn't change and therefore we can apply it everywhere. Fill in some more details to make this make more sense to me.
So the success of this pilot was that they were able to drastically reduce the amount of feedback swirls that the team went through. So in the old world, to create emails, the marketing partners would come with some request and say, this is what we want, and the email, and then the creative designers would go off in their black box for a couple of weeks and create some phenomenal, really shiny object, present it back to the marketing partners, and they'd say, well, no, wait, that's not really what we wanted, that wasn't what we mean. And they'd go back again, or they'd have to say, okay, here's where we think we're off point, but now I need to go check with my manager, who's then gonna go get feedback from their manager, and then their manager's mother will weigh in on what they thought about the emails. True story. So by empowering the individual contributors on that team and the core team to be able to make the decisions on whether or not the creative was meeting the goals of the campaign, and by leaving that up to the team, things happen much faster. So
the part I don't understand is where you said it didn't change anything and therefore it was applicable everywhere.
The quality didn't change.
Oh, the quality didn't change, sorry. So the performance of the emails didn't change, meaning they didn't drop in performance. So by having the core team members making key decisions on whether or not the campaign or the designs were meeting the campaign was left to the core team members, and it didn't drop. They were expecting it to drop significantly, or at least for a couple of key areas to have some movement. And because they didn't drop, they realized all of this extra time that they were spending collecting all this feedback and tweaking tiny little shades of this tiny little button or this font here or there, those weren't making significant enough impacts to justify the time that it was taking to make those changes.
Thank you.
So my question is more about the culture in which this took place. Would you say the leadership was predisposed to experimentation, suspending disbelief, or was this more of a skunk works, which gathered the data, which presented convincing evidence, where then they started to maybe get a little bit more receptive to this?
Definitely the latter of the two. I think there was some natural reservations and skepticism from senior leadership, but you saw they had enough motivation. They knew there were systemic problems and they wanted to make changes. They weren't quite ready to take that bold step and say, we're all in, or do what you want, but they carved out at least enough of a place within this North American email team to do enough experimentation with the understanding that it's not going to happen overnight. And I think that's where the surprising success came.
Did you have something of a champion in that one space that made it easier?
Absolutely.
Or was it just that?
We did. We had a dedicated coach. We also had, she's sitting right here, Kim. You can feel free to raise your hand. She went through a lot of Agile training and education from some of the coaches. She and a couple of others. There was another design manager also embedded on the team. So they were essentially Agile champions for the group. So it took a lot.
So the pilot team, was that comprised primarily of people who were relatively new, or people who've been around a long time, or a mix?
It was an established team already. It was folks, there was a account manager, a project manager, and I believe 2 creative designers. This is just from the agency side that were already working with the email channel. So they were not new to that, and they were not new to Vistaprint. So they had, they had ingrained their ways in the Vistaprint way.
I have a question. You said at the start that you had account managers before, and now you no longer have them. And my question is, how did that play out? I imagine some people didn't like having their job eliminated. I imagine you opened up other pathways for them. Can you say something about that?
Sure.
There were 3 account managers. One transitioned to another role in the company and is now an Agile product owner in that other group. One had previously decided to leave because she was looking for some other opportunities. And a third went on a long-term leave and is now coming back to the company, and they're looking for other roles that she can have.
Actually, I'm
Okay.
going to hand it over to
Okay.
David to tell the story from our coaching perspective.
All right, thank you very much, Staci. Thank you for your interest and questions. So Staci's given you the story from the Vistaprint perspective, from the executive perspective, from the team's perspective. I'm going to tell the story from the coach's perspective, sort of the inside baseball. How did we help the teams achieve some of these results? And then I'm also going to talk about the follow-on impact and how the rest of the entire business unit has proceeded from there. Okay? So a little bit about me. In addition to my work here with Agile New England, these are some of the organizations where I've done lean and Agile coaching. Okay? So if we look at the coach's story, it actually starts with a woman who some of you might have met, who started working at Vistaprint before I was there, Aslam Yus. She's now in London, and she was one of the leading coaches that started with our technology group. And after helping our base technology group with their transformation, because now we have about 50 technology teams across the company, and every one of them are doing some flavor of Agile, mainly Scrum, a little bit of Kanban. And with the success that she had, the vice president of the agency reached out and said, we've got a whole bunch of problems. I don't know if there's anything you can do for us, but can you help? So the very first thing that Aslam did was create this value stream map. And you can only read parts of it. I'll go into some detail in some of the interesting things. But she mapped out the end-to-end value stream and looked at how many hours of actual work happened in each of those blue boxes, and then looked at the total elapsed time in business days of how much time it actually took to get the work done. And if you do the math, it takes about 24 labor hours to get one of these emails through the process end to end. Okay? But in calendar time, it could take as much as 8 weeks. Our process efficiency on this particular case was 3%. The amount of actual work versus the amount of calendar time. And that's why the lead times were so outrageous. Okay? But from a lean coaching perspective, it's a great opportunity because it flags that there's all kinds of waste throughout the system, mainly in the wait states. So we didn't get any gains by cracking the whip and getting people to work faster and cut down the labor time on the work. That was, they were doing the best they can. But it was squeezing the waste and removing the wait states. That's what this was all about. So here's some particular examples. So for instance, to accomplish about a day and a half's worth of work from the time that the work came in till the time that the creative work was complete and ready for the review cycle, about a day and a half's worth of work took 21 business days. A review cycle, just the internal review within the agency before it was turned over to what we then called our clients for review, to get one labor day's worth of work took an entire week. And to go into production, just from the time that we had the approval to actually moving it through the production cycle, QA, sometimes translation was involved, was 3 days worth of work, and it was 1 day's worth of work, and it took 18 days. So these were the states that we started with. But this analysis made it very clear that we had a flow problem. Now, you might ask, how could it possibly take that much time to do one email? I mean, I do 50 emails a day. You probably do hundreds. Right? How can it take that much time for one email? Well, just show you some of the complexity of these emails. Right? The tabs here, those are all leading to different landing pages. We've got this animation going on in this email. We've got buttons all over the place. We've got lots of photography, lots of copy, buttons for people to link to actually start to do some shopping. And we've got a whole lot of legal compliance stuff down at the bottom. So there's a lot of work. And the aesthetic view, what it takes to make that really look nice, does take a lot of time. So the fact that we can get that much work done in 3 labor days actually is pretty good from a working perspective. So one of the very first tools that I used to understand this process was I created a stakeholder analysis matrix. And this is an example from one of the websites from Tools for Dev, and I used a similar model. And because there were so many stakeholders, so many executives, directors, designers, copywriters, marketing partners, production people. We have production artists in Tunis. We have translators all over the world. There were so many people that I couldn't keep them straight in my mind, particularly being new to the organization. I now know most of them. So just having one place where I could look at who the people were, what was their impact, what was their acceptance level of Agile, what was their resistance, what were the problems they were running into. In one spreadsheet, I could keep track of all of the players because this was all about relationships. The second step we did is we had a chartering meeting. And we modeled it after a small version that comes out of Diana Larson's and Ainsley Ninth's book called Liftoff. And some of you might remember that a couple of years ago, Diana came and talked about this book. So we used some of those principles. Okay? And this is the agenda from that meeting. Okay? And we had a welcoming from the directors, Tiffany and Melissa. We also had the 2 guest speakers, the 2 vice presidents that I talked about. And this is the meeting where they gave the team permission to experiment. Understanding that failure was a possibility. And that was alien to the culture at the time because failure was not an option. There were too many examples of people who failed and were gone. So that was a big deal. Yes, Andrew?
So, David, what kind of pre-work did it take before you held this meeting, where the executives were willing to take some risks and
give up some power?
At this point, they were so much at their wits' end that they were willing to try anything. So, and they had tried some other things and it wasn't working. So they were willing to, trust us for a little bit. So we had a little bit of leeway at the beginning, but if we didn't start delivering, that trust would have been gone. We had a little bit of honeymoon, so took advantage of that. Another thing that was an integral part of this process was Agile education. We happened to subscribe. We worked with Emergent. I was originally a consultant with Emergent. And Emergent has an education framework called VFQ, Value, Flow, Quality, which is, among other things, a set of 18 books and presentations. And that's the education framework. It's methodology agnostic, so it supports Scrum, it supports Kanban. Some people use it with DSDM. So it's more of an education framework about Agile, about Lean, and so we didn't give this whole framework. We selected for this team 3 relevant courses, particularly related to flow, and worked with them on that. Other groups in our organization have created book clubs. So, and they actually take their team through reading every one of these books. They read one a month, and they get together and discuss it. So the education was a big part of helping our people. One of the really key things is that it wasn't just about doing Agile. It was about being Agile. It was about creating the Agile mindset. And this was an evolution that took at least a year, and it was a combination of doing some practices, showing some success, teaching some of the principles, and getting people to focus more on what it meant to be Agile. Because we stressed over and over again that the whole point of doing this is to return better business results. We avoid Agile for Agile's sake. We focus on what we can deliver and how we can improve the organization and try to make it as economically clear as possible. Another thing that we did is create a set of Agile value and principles that was specific to Vistaprint marketing. Because when I first started teaching Agile outside of engineering, and I said, oh, here's the Agile manifesto, Agile values, Agile principles. And it says things like, we value working software. Working software is the only measure of value. Well, you're a marketing person, what's going to make you sign up for that? So the original Agile Manifesto, 2001, about 10 years later, a group of marketing thought leaders got together and created the first version of the Agile Marketing Manifesto. And we started using that, but that was an early draft, and some of the wording was a little hard for people to understand, so we streamlined it a little bit for Vistaprint. So we liberally plagiarized from all the other sources, but we made it work for us. But the key thing is it focuses on delivering value, in this case on how to be Agile in marketing, and incorporates some of the more modern lean thinking that wasn't quite as in vogue in 2001 when the Agile thought leaders got together in Utah. So that was one of the key things. Yep.
How did you measure customer success in that case? Did you mention one of the standards, customer success or KPI?
Okay. So at that time, as we were beginning, a lot of it was traditional KPIs, and I'll show you some examples for that. We are measuring right now the internal customer success, is how successful are our marketing partners being with the work that we're delivering. It's only recently that our corporate executives have redefined the company's mission, and our goal is now stated to help our customers, who are small business people, attain their dreams. And that's our new definition of success. We're just beginning to ask ourselves, how do you measure that? Where are you on the dream meter? So it's an important question. It was something we're frankly still struggling with. Okay. So a lot of what we did came about through a pretty straightforward application of the Kanban method. So if any of you were here when David Anderson spoke last winter, you got some details on what Kanban is. Many of you might know it. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just fly through some of the key elements. There are 6 principles in Kanban. The first one is visualize the work, typically done on a Kanban board. This was an example. And as the team evolved, this board was ripped down and put back together again about once a quarter. It was just blue tape on an idea paint wall and a lot of stickies. And we just, bless you, and we just, we decided we had a change in the value stream, or we wanted to demonstrate something different or try a different principle. We'd rip this up and start over again. They introduced swim lanes for class of service. So rush were the things that typically a small change that came in at the last minute could do in, get through the whole process in a day or two. You could drop everything, do that, and still get back to your regular work. The normal stuff, in our case, was mainly fixed date delivery. You know, when holiday promotions are coming, you got fixed calendars. Our email drops are in a fixed calendar. Our low priority stuff was things that didn't really have a date associated with them, with just sort of intangible process improvement. And the big advantage of this visibility that came by having the work being visible to everybody is that the transparency and the communications that happened was tremendous, because the marketing partners, who were the internal customers for this, could see where their projects were, when they were likely to be delivered, or if they were being blocked in any way. So it really began to create some trust by making all that information visible. Second thing was to limit WIP. Basic principle, if your WIP is lower, you can go faster. So you can see some numbers on those boards. This number 4 here was all of the actual creative work. That was basically, we had 4 designers on the project at that time, gave them one at a time to work on, trying to avoid overload. Some of these others, we had this 6 here was number of things that could be in review. We had things that were in translation or pre-production or production. So we just limited the number of things that people would work on at any one time. And we primarily focused on the fixed date delivery, because that was the bulk of the work, and that was the most visible work. So by limiting the WIP, we were able to, and letting people focus on finishing the work rather than starting more work, we increased the speed at which things went through the process, because they were able to focus, we could deliver faster. We managed the flow in a number of ways. One thing was by tracking cycle time and lead time. This was by work type, and we looked at trends over months. We also had some big visible displays on cycle time and lead time, and focused on some of these big areas in the value stream map that were obvious, looking for review. So the internal review process, we originally started with the art director, who would review 100% of the creative assets and approve them before they could be shown to an external client. We had this agency mentality. You're in an external agency and you have a paying external client, right? You want it to be perfect before you show it to them, because otherwise they think you're unprofessional. Right? That's the agency world. We're an internal advertising agency. Our clients are our marketing partners. They don't really have a choice to go anywhere else unless we're really, really, really screwing up. Right? So we realized that if we moved to a buddy check system, where you didn't have to wait for the art director to get out of 6 different meetings and give you feedback 2 days later, but you could finish something, or even a rough draft, show it to your fellow designer, and get feedback immediately, that you could get as good work and get it done in minutes instead of weeks. So again, by looking at that flow and looking where ways we could optimize the flow, again, it increased the speed, gave us better delivery. The 4th Agile principle is make the process explicit. Make your policies explicit. And here are some examples where the team created some of their policies. So for instance, they had a policy that we'd have a kickoff meeting on any non-trivial design, and they had some rules to make these meetings more effective. So they realized that their kickoff meeting wasn't terribly effective. They made the policies explicit. Another set of policies, this was related to how they were doing some of the steps in the process. By making these policies explicit, we increased the reliability because it was now more repeatable, and we improved the quality. So we're trying to go from fast, cheap, and good, pick two, to you can have all three. Another policy, another principle of Kanban is to create feedback loops. And when I work with, when I start standing up new Agile teams, typically in the technology groups that I've worked with, particularly in the days before DevOps, it was trying to convince the developers of the value of feedback. It was, oh God, those QA people, they're driving me crazy. They find all these bugs. They make me fix things. They don't let me write code. Why have this feedback? It just adds time. Well, in the agency, if anything, there was too much feedback. And Staci gave you some examples where, the first line person would give you feedback and you'd fix that. Then their manager would give you feedback, and their director would give you feedback. And sometimes they would contradict each other. So we'd get these feedback swirls. And this would take weeks to get things done. So we created these kind of feedback loops, but the question here was identify all the ones we have, right? Eliminate the low-value feedback loops, and amp up the high-value feedback loops. And by making the feedback loops more effective, it reduced the frustration of the designers and the writers. Things got through just at the much, much faster, and we maintained the quality level by keeping on and amplifying those effective feedback loops. This last principle, collaborate and experiment, something that Dave Anderson added several years after he wrote the Blue Book. And to me, this is the single most important aspect of Kanban. And if you only do one principle in Kanban, I would do this one. Right? So the first thing is break down those silos. Right? Get people talking to each other. That Agile value of face-to-face communication, and have people talk directly to each other rather than complain up the chain to their vice president, goes down the other vice president, comes back down the other silo. Some of you must have seen that. Right? Yeah. So break down the silos. That's one of the key items. And Staci talked about the issue around decision rights. So this was an example of collaboration where at the time, we went from weeks to days by moving the decision rights down into the organization to the first line people. Eliminating those feedback swirls, getting people talking face to face, spending more time together. And when things went a lot faster without losing any business impact. So here's an example, and you probably can't read the numbers down on the bottom, or maybe people in front, but these are the KPIs, because even though we value customer success over KPIs, you still need them to run the business. And basically, this was a case, one of multiple cases in the experiments, where we brought people together, we drove the decision rights down into the system, we had expectations about how much revenue this would perform, what the click-through rates would be, what the booking rates would be, and every one of the campaigns in this experiment delivered equal or better results. Peter, get a microphone for Peter.
What is a KPI?
Oh, sorry. KPIs are key performance indicators. Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. KPIs are key performance indicators. And at Vistaprint, we are very, very good at we've tremendous amounts of data that we use all the time. We have 17 million customers doing business with us every single year. We have terabytes and terabytes of data. We have great analytics embedded in our website. We know everything about what people do on our website. We have enormous data warehouses. We have good analytic tools, and we have a large number of dedicated data analysts to provide us information. So we know how things are likely to perform. We have a good history, and we know what levers to pull to increase that performance. So we're a data-driven organization, and we can use that data to help us track and improve our performance on our items. But the key thing here was the experimentation and the collaboration. Those are the two key things that really drove it, because at the end of the day, it's all about people. It's all about relationships. Getting back to the account managers are wonderful people. Right? They were doing great work band-aiding the fact that we didn't have good internal relationships. Right? And we didn't get rid of them because they weren't doing their job. They were doing their job too well. They were guarding those relationships and presenting barriers between the people. And when we created those relationships through collaboration, through experimentation, that's where the job satisfaction went up, the performance went up, the results. So what were some of the key success factors? If you look at this in summary, what delivered it? First of all, we did have enough executive support. They really wanted this to succeed. They had seen the success in technology. They gave us permission to fail. We did a significant amount of Agile education. And not only did we educate the members of the team, but we also did follow-on education of a 12-week pathway for for managers and directors. We've really focused on creating that Agile mindset. When people have that Agile mindset, they can do Agile, they can get the results. If you're just being Agile and checking the box and saying you're Agile, you're not going to see the results. In this case, in taking Agile beyond engineering, it was critical that we be able to talk about a set of values and principles that were congruent with the Agile Manifesto, but didn't rely on software. Talk more about marketing. And applying the Kanban method, as written in the book, works. That was another key success factor. And, as we said, never miss an opportunity to exploit a good crisis. So, this overwhelming success opened the door for a couple of key things. It gave us Agile across the globe. We've now brought this to our office in Barcelona, to our office in Tunis, and we are starting to bring it to our call centers in Jamaica, in India, et cetera. Okay? And it started the conversation at the executive level, because we repeated this. This wasn't just a one-off. We repeated this with 2 and 3 other teams in the agency. We repeated this with some teams on our marketing side, a group that does paid search. And we saw that this actually could work beyond engineering. So we now have begun to change the mindset at the executive level, not just the 2 VPs that were in crisis, but the entire executive team. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things we've done since this pilot that resulted from, that are now helping us to bring things further. And I'm going to give a little shameless commerce for some Agile in New England events, because they actually contributed in some very important ways. So at the recent Agile Games Conference, we coupled that, or was followed immediately by the Mob Programming Conference. And it turned out that the the manager of our design group in Barcelona was in town, and he attended. And he met Woody as well. And went to Woody's talk about mob programming, and went to Woody and said, anybody ever tried this for design? He said, I don't think so. So we had the world's first mob design event back in May. And I'm not going to try to give you the full explanation, but Woody talks about mob programming as being all the brilliant minds working on the same thing at the same time in the same space on the same computer. And we did that for design on a couple of occasions. So typically what you have is one driver, person on the keyboard, person types what people tell them, driver's not allowed to think. The navigators, everybody else in the room, tells the driver what to type. That works for code. We tried it for design. So here's 3 teams, 2 in one of our offices in Barcelona, and the group on the video at the far end is actually here in Waltham, Massachusetts. And this group was designing banner display ads, the ads that you can click on, and they have all sorts of interesting animation and stuff like that. And the work that takes to go from initial design to complete, it's typically taken about a week and a half, sometimes 2 weeks. We got 3 teams together. Right? We spent 2 days, right? 2 hours on the first day, just understanding the requirements for the 3 or 4 banner ads that these teams were going to work on. The next day got together for another 2 hours and followed the mob programming paradigm, where we had designers, writers, project managers, even this funny-looking guy here, Agile coach, and they actually let me put my hands on a keyboard, and I haven't seen a Mac in 10 years. And in 2 hours, completed 4 display ads. Now these were changes on previous ads, but they were redirecting them to different market segments, so there was pretty significant changes. And that was done in 2 hours. We completed 4 display ads, which usually take a week and a half apiece. That's how we do each, week and a half each. This comes from a lightning talk I gave at Agile 2016. So one other thing that they do,
So that's 60 hours to 30 minutes?
yeah. Well, it wasn't 60 hours, it was 60 hours of calendar time.
Correct.
We reduced the calendar time,
Correct.
so the lead time went from 60 hours, in this case it was 26 because it was over 2 days, but I'll show you an example that's even more dramatic. Okay? So one of the things we do in part of the requirements phase is we task out the steps of what we're going to do, so they do some planning, right? And then every 7 minutes, we rotate. So here we have a project manager with a designer and a writer and a marketing partner. And every 7 minutes, rotate, and somebody else sits down at the keyboard and becomes the driver. This is another design team. Then, in June, we brought together our now global email team. We combined the North American email team with the Barcelona email team, and now they're a global team. And they came together for a summit to learn from each other, and they did mob design. And they completed 3 significant alterations on previous emails. So that was, and again, this work that typically from start to approval is about a week. They brought them down to 45 minutes. Okay? And not only was it done in 45 minutes, but the camaraderie and the group appreciation and all of the collaboration that came from that is just fantastic. So these are the kinds of things, by bringing an Agile mindset into an organization, they can think about doing things that used to take weeks and weeks and getting them done in a day or less. And it's all because of the collaboration. It's all because we get the minds coming together. A second thing that happened, again, another Agile New England event, I've talked a little bit about this in the past, was Agile New England held an event, Agile for Executives, and one of their speakers in March was Rich Sheridan. Rich Sheridan is the CEO and chief storyteller at a company called Menlo Innovations. And he's written this book called Joy Incorporated, How to Create Workplaces That People Love. And we can go on and talk about Rich for days. But basically, because of the event, we had one of our HR directors who was at this event. And she was so taken by what Rich said in his message that she left the event. And she went back and she looked at his YouTube videos. And she read the book. And she went to her boss, and the VP of talent and the CTO, and said, we have to figure out what they're doing, what their secret sauce is. And our CTO, who had gone through the Agile transformation and had adapted his Agile mindset during the technology Agile transformation, said, well, we're not a software for hire development lab, but they're getting something really exciting done there. We can learn from the extremes. So we took two sets of coaches, directors, VPs to Menlo, and this is some shots from Menlo, this is their workspace. Menlo does 100% pairing. Every line of production code at Menlo is written in pairs. Okay? They also believe in face-to-face communication. Okay? That's Rich Sheridan. That's one of the employees' babies. Rich would rather deal with babies in the office than lose face-to-face communication. They also have dogs in the office. The floors are concrete. That's because they have dogs there. The contract allows at least up to 3 dogs in their office at any one time. That's their lease. We also, when we were out there, we visited Zingerman's Roadhouse. Okay? Anybody ever been to Zingerman's? Okay, so you know something about it. So our VP of talent, who was on the trip, on the first trip we went out there, has been a lifelong customer of Zingerman's, but had never been to Ann Arbor because they have 8 different businesses. One of their businesses is mail order gourmet food. Okay? They also have the Roadhouse, which is a barbecue place. The wagon is just their takeout window. They actually have a real restaurant behind that. And she had arranged to meet with their founder, Harry. Now, Zingerman's happens to be in Ann Arbor. There's no business connection between Menlo and Zingerman's, but Rich Sheridan knows Ari and actually wrote quite a bit about Zingerman's in the book. Okay? And we spent an hour at dinner with Ari and our server. Okay? And the server was a woman with a college degree who had been working as a waitress in this restaurant for 15 years. Okay? And she was so excited, so thrilled about the way she was about her work. And it was all because their company is all about engagement. And these are some of the things we learned about. Right? She brought us a copy of their monthly business plan, which is on a big whiteboard. And she could point to 2 lines on that whiteboard that she owned. She was a server, and she owned a part of their business plan. And just seeing her excitement and her enthusiasm, we couldn't help but order 3 of the desserts that she was talking about, even though we were completely full from all the barbecue, but it sounded so good we had to order them.
Was that one of the lines in the business plan?
Could be. But so it's these are the kinds of things that we were able to learn as an executive team. And we've sent a total of 40 people for an all-day seminar at Menlo and spend time there. And we're sending our experienced designers to take their course in high-tech anthropology, observing your customers in their natural habitat. Okay? And these are kinds of things that we've started to adopt because we know that we can bring Agile across the board to the entire organization. So one other thing that came out of this is the executives, many of whom were on these trips, are trying to embrace Agile in the way they work. And they said, let's run an experiment. Okay? Let's all get out of our offices. They all had, most people up to director in Vistaprint do not have offices. They're all in queues. VPs and above have offices. They said, we'll give up our office for a month, and we'll work together around this big white table. And we'll get together, and we'll work in pairs, and we'll be very agile. Okay? Well, I was lucky to find 2 people who are actually working at these desks, because what they found out is the way they work, they travel so much, they're out of the office so much, they're not there enough to actually take advantage of being together in space. So they ran this experiment, right, and they weren't getting a whole lot out of it. And rather than saying, oh, that was a lousy idea, let's go back to our offices, instead they said, what did we learn from this? Well, what we learned is when we did get together, we actually got a lot of things done very productively. We just weren't doing it often enough. So the value of sitting out there was only for show, and they recognized it. So they did go back to their offices, but they've agreed to come together when they're working on it, to be together every Wednesday for at least 3 hours. And they work together as a team. They now have a Kanban board. This is for all of our executive initiatives are on a Kanban board, which is visible to all employees. It's outside the president's office. And they are working in pairs. So we have our executives from different divisions pairing on owning initiatives. Yeah, Steve.
So, obviously, a theme to my questions. So this seems to be somewhat unnatural for senior leaders, right? Because it's usually about turf. It's usually about, now would you say that that wasn't deeply ingrained, or the experiments led them to open up? In other words, what sort of degree of safety was created for them to do this? Or did they just create it themselves?
I think, well, first of all, the company is a very hierarchical company. 1.2 billion from the Vistaprint business unit, about $1.5 billion company, publicly traded, traditional hierarchical organization, very results oriented. But what we're also realizing is that the things that have made us successful in the past is our barrier to our continued success. And while we are profitable and growing, we're not growing nearly as fast as they think we should, and there's good justification for why we should be able to grow faster. So they're faced with, we need to do something different. And part of it is they've seen that Agile works well outside of engineering, so success breeds success, which opens their mind to thought and consideration of these other items. They also have tasked themselves to make themselves and the organization faster and nimbler. And again, they've seen things like that. Now, there are other initiatives that we're taking that are, again, similar to or consistent with Agile, like design thinking. We're bringing that into the organization as well. And the president has just approved a proposal from the coaching team to take the entire organization, every single department in the Vistaprint business unit will become Agile. We are tripling the number of coaches. And we're starting with the executive team. Just before I came over here, I ran into the president at our drinks and appetizer night, and she told me that she had just completed the homework assignment I gave her, which is the pre-work for our first Agile training, where we're going to begin to teach every member of the executive team what value is, what flow is, what quality is, what the Agile values and principles are, and how to take on an Agile leadership stance.
So from the times of the very initial experiments and sort of probing and playing around with this to the point at which you're getting the sort of cultural shift, how long did that take?
18 months. Dave?
Yes, thinking about it, going back to the very first thing that was done is that value stream and that 10-to-1 calendar against amount. Imagine, that must have opened a lot of eyes and didn't have to do any sophisticated Kanban to bring the point across. And B, well, I'm thinking that there must have been initially some resistance of all these high-level executives and managers who had their finger on the pulse, and that they may resist to let go and let it flow without their sign-off. And A, that's a resistance, and B, the more I heard after that, the more that I realized it was necessary for them to let it go in order for the company to be completely agile. So how did you get them to realize it, and even more, to fight their own resistance and get out of the loop?
The simple answer is experimentation and results. Let us try something, try a little something, show results, very quick iterations, and try something again, try it bigger, try more. So that was the key, is experimentation and results. But it's still very hard, right? Because we've got directors and managers and executives who together have hundreds of years of experience in the business. They've been through this. They know what works. They know what doesn't work, or at least what didn't work 10 years ago when they had their hands on it. Right? And on the one hand, they feel that they are letting the company down by not injecting their brilliance, their experience into this creative process. So, they weren't doing it as control freaks. They were doing it because they genuinely, honestly believed that they were improving the result. But when we could show them, we said, just try, right? Get out of the way for 3 emails. We do, dozens of email campaigns every week. Get out of the way for 3 emails and measure the result. Take 2 layers of management out of this process and let us try. Okay? Worst case, well, we'll lose a couple $100,000. We're doing millions of dollars of business a day if we learn something from it. Turned out the results were at least as good, if not slightly better, and things went a lot faster, and we freed up these directors and managers to go do their real job, which is to be more strategic. So it was more just, it's basically success breeds success, where it comes to. And it grows, and then you just try it further. We said, let's try it in Barcelona. Let's try it in our merchandising team. Let's try it in our photography team. And we consistently reproduce those results. And again, it was the fact that you could take Agile beyond engineering. It wasn't just a software methodology. Okay. So that's pretty much it. What I'd like you to do is think about what we've talked about and see if you could write down one thing. I'm not going to ask you to share it. This is just for yourself. One thing that you can take away from this talk, this discussion, and that you can start doing tomorrow. So take a minute or so, just reflect a little bit on what you've kind of learned here. Now, if you want any more details on what we did and how we did it, Staci and I have written a paper that was published on the Agile Alliance website on their experience reports, so you can get the electronic version there. We've got a handful of hard copies if you want. We'll leave them in the back of the room. You can take those with you. Okay.
David, one question.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about a 12-week path for executives as
Yeah.
and I don't understand. Was that 12 weeks where people were doing something for 5 days?
No, this was a, we do Agile practitioner pathways, and we're starting a leadership pathway as well. It takes place over 12 weeks. It starts off with one full day kickoff, and then there are 8 other sessions over the next 12 weeks. Those are 2 hours each. But they also have sessions along the way where they're actually applying the lessons in their work, and they're doing homework, and they're doing reading. So so a lot of people say, I want to go be educated. Okay, I'll go to a 2-day Scrum Master training. Yeah, it's helpful. I'll go to a 3-day conference. You learn something. But to really get the knowledge and be able to internalize it, you've got to have some time to be taught, some time to apply it, some time to learn from it. And that's what we deliver in these pathways. And that's where, and people are on their Agile journey, and the light bulb comes on at different points along the way. So we did a pathway with 10 people. Staci was in this class back about a year ago. And, some people after the second or third class, some people halfway through, some people towards the end. They either went from complete skeptics, I can't possibly use this, to, oh, gee, I'll start thinking about it, or from people who were curious and became absolutely committed. And one of the key things that really made us successful, during one of these pathways, the director, who was the sponsor for this pathway, about halfway through, she left the class, and the light bulb went on. And she went to that vice president, who was tired of things being late, right, and said, we have to double down in Agile. And that was the key that really unlocked a lot of the things. If you're looking for an aha moment, a breakthrough, it happened when that director got it and said, this isn't just an email pilot. This is for the entire agency. It's for all of marketing. So the interplay of the education, the application, the pilots, the success, that all came together.
How many different pathways do you have, and for what audiences?
Let's see. We've done one for product owners. We do a general one for Agile practitioners. We're about to start one for Agile leaders. And we got a lot of this material from Emergent, and they've recently added pathways for developers and QA people. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much. That's our contact information. Appreciate it.